question. Good. That's fine. Sorry, folks. Restart the recording. Great. Okay. Recording is in progress. That's in progress. That's good. All right. We're going to get started. Please interrupt with questions if you have questions. Last week, we went through the Aramaic verses and we heard how Daniel finished his prayer. You know, he went back to his friends and he said, we need to daven, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the answer to what Nebuchadnezzar needs, because otherwise we and all the other Chachamim of Bavel are going to be killed. And I didn't do quite as much as I wanted about showing the parallels between Daniel and Yosef, but we see that there are a bunch of parallels there, and we'll go back to that maybe after Hanukkah. But what I wanted to do today actually was to give you a perush on some of the meaning behind this dream and some parallels between this dream and other things. According to the Maharal of Prague, who wrote a small, not even a full book really, because I have it. It looks like it's a whole book, but only part of it is about Hanukkah, and then the rest of it's about Purim. And actually, most of the book is about Purim. Only part of it's about Hanukkah. The part about Hanukkah is called Ner Mitzvah. The part about Purim is called Or Chadash. And the part about Hanukkah, it's a little like Hanukkah's in there and it's not in there. Like, what actually is going on? The Maharal claims that this whole business of galut, okay, whether it's galut outside of the land or whether it's being in a state of galut even inside the land, because that was what was going on at Hanukkah time. They were in Israel. They were here. They were in Yerushalayim. But there was another nation that had control. And so they were at home and they weren't at home. And these different kinds of exile, of being displaced, according to Maharal, are very much built into creation. There are certain aspects of lack, of we're missing stuff, that we have to realize that we're not missing anything, that it all comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But until we work our way through all of that, and until humanity works its way through all of that, we have this long process, and this process involves, gets expressed as galut. And he shows in his Ma'amar, called Ner Mitzvah, he shows a large number of places where this fourness of the galut shows up. One of them is in our chapter, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And in the dream, we had a head of gold, we had a body and the upper arms of silver, we had the abdomen and the thighs were of nechoshet, or copper, brass, bronze, whatever, and the lower part of the legs were strictly of iron, and then the toes were iron and mixed with pottery, the toes on the foot. And the Maharal, he's not the only one by a long shot, but the Maharal tells us that the head of gold, and actually Daniel himself told Nebuchadnezzar that the head of gold, that was Nebuchadnezzar himself. So it's very clear that stands for Bavel. And then there was going to come an empire following him, okay, which would be less than him. And that happens to be, some people apply this to Madai, some people apply to Paras. Most people say Paras and Madai, were together, they exchanged places. Basically, that's all one type of culture. So we'll just say Paras and Madai. Depends. Like I said, it depends. The next one, most Chazal take to be Yavan, to be Greece, and that would be the story of Hanukkah. All right. And that's probably why he put it together, and he attached it to the things that he wrote about the Inyanim of Hanukkah. And then the last one, it's interesting. The last one he calls Malchut Harshi'ah, which means the evil empire. Ronald Reagan would be pleased, I guess. He calls it Malchut Harshi'ah. Most of us identify it with Edom, meaning Rome, meaning the West in general. And Yishmael doesn't show up in this set of 4 things. And the Maharal goes on, and he brings not only parallels between the Daniel's dream and the various parts and the different kinds of metal, but he also brings, he says, you can see these same 4 different things. Daniel himself has a vision, not this nevuah that he gets about Nebuchadnezzar's vision, but he gets his own vision at the end of the Aramaic section of the Sefer during Belshazzar's reign, where he sees 4 animals, one after another. And again, the first one is like a lion with the wings of an eagle. The second one is like a bear. The third one is like a leopard, but it has wings. And the fourth one is very different from all of the others. And it had a lot of horns, and then one of the horn, and then they fall off, and it grew, and different things are going on. There are people, not the Maharal, who, when dealing with that 4th beast, again, the body of the lion, the wings of the eagle, that was attributed to be the equivalent of Bavel. The one that was like a bear, that was attributed to be Paras Madai. Okay. The one that was like a leopard, that was Yavan. And this most fearsome one, that's this Edom. The question is what's the other stuff that happens to it before? In the end, all of these disappear, right? In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, there was this one statue in the shape of a man, from gold to silver to copper to steel or iron to then at the bottom, the iron and the pottery combined. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a stone that seemingly was self-propelled crashes into the statue, and the statue dissipates, blows away. Okay, this is in the dream. This is the details that are in the dream. It just shatters, it blows away like it never was. And then that stone grows to become like a great mountain. And that stone is Am Yisrael. And that great mountain is, and then that's the end of this cycle within creation, and that's Yemot HaMashiach. Okay, so the Maharal goes and makes all sorts of parallels, and he explains why each one of these things should dafka, like what do the details have to do with it, right? Like, why did gold and the head belong to Bavel? And his answer to that is that, and it's sort of the larger answer to the whole thing, is that when the world was created, there were like 4 basic lacks or sense of I'm missing something. And so I try to fill my emptiness. Okay. What kinds of emptiness can I have? I can have an emptiness that is an emptiness because I want to be in charge, because I want to have kavod. Okay. I don't want to hurt or destroy or anything else the people that I am that I'm in charge of, but I want everybody to follow what I say, because I want to know that I'm important. That kind of a lack, this search after kavod. So if we look in Pirkei Avot, we're told that this inappropriate search for kavod is one of the things that takes us out of the world. We're also told in a different place in Pirkei Avot, who has kavod? The one who gives kavod to everybody else. So there's a way to be filled with kavod, and that's to run away from it. Okay. There's a way to fill that lack within ourselves, and that's to fill it for other people. Okay. And to recognize that the lack isn't about me. It's about, I need to have, what is kavod after all, right? Kavod is the revelation of godliness in the world. So when I reveal the Tzelem Elokim in other people and I honor that, then the honor comes back to me as well. My needs are filled, their needs are filled. That's going to happen Yemot HaMashiach. Okay, that's going to happen at the end. But until then, that's one of the basic lacks that there is in the world as it is today. What's another one of the lacks that there is in the world today, or ways in which we try to fill it, right? Is that we have physical bodies. We don't just have a soul that wants to connect to other things and other people and to maybe be in charge. And we have to realize that we can't be in charge. So that's both the klipa and the tikkun of Bavel. The next one is more about the body itself. Okay, so we started with the head, which is the most important part. It was of gold, which is the most important metal. Okay. It had the body of a lion, which was the ruler not in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but in Daniel's vision. Okay. And so this business about that it wants to be the most important. It's looking for kavod. It wants to rule. This is how the Maharal explained it to us. And he gives us, by the way, there are going to be some other psukim. I'm going to come back and review all this. He brings psukim from Yirmiyahu. He brings an example from the non-kosher animals. But it's built into, and this I will tell you from the beginning, is built into the fabric of creation, because he goes back to one of the first verses in Bereshit and he says, V'ha'aretz hayta tohu, that's Bavel. Okay, that's this head of gold. It was tohu. And what do you want when it's tohu? You want to make order out of it. You want because there's something lacking, the sense of order, the sense of kavod. That's what's lacking. There's a way to get it in a good way, and there's a way that is a less good way. Okay, there's the klipa, and there's the way to do it b'kedusha, and then uvohu. So in Daniel's dream, he saw it like a bear. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the upper body part was of silver. The word kesef in Hebrew also means liksof, to desire, to want stuff. You have kisufim, okay? And so this upper body of silver is, he wants to, this is the language of the Maharal himself, he says he wants to swallow everything. In Daniel's vision that we'll get to the end of the course, when we get to chapter 7, it's like a bear, okay? It has bones coming out of its teeth. It's a meat eater. It wants to, okay, it wants everything to access. It has no sense of limit. And it just, why? Because it doesn't know how to make do with what's necessary for it. You know, we have bodies, our bodies need to be fed, but all the issues of addiction in general, okay, come from this lack within us, that we think somehow that we can fill the lack within us by filling it. And we swallow more and more and more, and we eat more and more and more, or smoke more and more, or drink, or whatever the addiction of choice is, okay? But we're still always feeling the lack, because the body, you know, it's interesting. The body in the world as it is today, post Gan Eden, pre-Yemot HaMashiach or pre-Olam Haba, you know, the body is going to deteriorate. And the body doesn't want that. And it feels like if I could only just keep feeding myself, you know, then as long as I'm growing, I'm not falling back. And so that's the sense of parasumadai. That's the sense of the bear. That's the kisufim. That's the kesef. All right. And the Maharal goes on and he tells us that, right, it wants more and more and more. And this is where Bavel is dealing with the nefesh, the Parasu Madai are dealing gufani. And he comes back to this issue because the holiday that we have that deals most with Parasu Madai is going to be Purim. And so he comes back to this in the other part of the Sefer called Or Chadash. He comes back to this whole issue of both the positive side and the negative side of this fixation on eating and drinking, and you see it in the Megillah, okay? And so it's always in a state, Parasa Madai is always in a state of taking and accepting, and it's always in a state of lack, and it always wants to swallow everything up. It wants to consume, okay? The third part, right? So, tohu uvohu, need to consume. V'choshech, and it was dark. So dark is the opposite of or. And of course, Hanukkah is, right, Chag HaUrim. It's the holiday of light. And it's and so Yavan, which prides itself on the Seichel, So what's Yavan's problem? This is the sichli part. Now, you would have thought maybe the sichli part should have been in the head, but no, this is the nechoshet part. And it comes below. For not all of it did he answer my questions on it, but he explains the reason that in Daniel's dream it looked like a leopard, because we say "ez kanamer," to be as brazen as a leopard. So Yavan, which wants to make light, it wants chachma more and more. It feels a lack of knowing. Okay, that's the lack for Yavan. And they think that they can solve it by just pushing human knowledge and human research, and that everything is going. What did they want? They want a world where they can predict everything that's going to happen. The notion that there's something that's outside of their ability to predict, that there's God, that there's divinity, that there's supernatural, that's anathema to them. So where Nebuchadnezzar just wanted to be in charge and for people to give him kavod, v'zel, okay? Where Parasu Madai wanted stuff. And so eventually Koresh and Darius and others of the Parasu Madai kings actually allowed the second Beit Mikdash to be built, because it's made clear to them by Nevuah, by dreams that they have later on, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides shefa to the world through the Beit HaMikdash. And so, just like Chazal say, that had the nations really understood what the purpose of the avoda in the Beit HaMikdash was, and how it serves as a sort of distribution point for shefa to the entire world, they would have been there lining up to protect it. By every person would have put their body on the line to protect it. They didn't understand, but the rulers of Parasu Madai eventually do understand. That's why they allow us to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, not because they love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but because they want the stuff that they're going to get. Okay, and they don't want to do harm to the Jews necessarily, according, so that galut is a galut of Gashmiut, and it's a galut that we're still fighting today. But it's a galut mamash of Gashmiut, and we need to figure out what is our appropriate relationship with stuff, with eating, with the physical world, and to learn how to say die. All right. With Yavan, I know about this only too well. We can play head games with ourselves. We think that we can explain everything if we just go on. And it was definitely Yavan's problem. So they didn't care about the Jews per se. And there's a great deal of wisdom in the Torah and in the rest of Nach. And they didn't have a problem with that. But what did they say to us? They said to us, right on the horn of the ox, right? Al Keren Hashor. And I'm going to misquote it as usual, but basically saying, I have no portion in, the God of Israel. Like, what does that mean for a Jew to say that I have no portion in the God of Israel? And the issue was that just because I'm looking for it, I'm not going to find it. Every other time, I'll just sort of open to that page. And I just wanted to be able to quote it to you properly in Hebrew, but I've already quoted the meaning of it. The reason, so what was going on? So one of the things that the Maharal was explaining is Dafka, the business of a shore, was to remind the Jews of Chet Ego. And this was, and what was it? And this is about Hanukkah. So this is the part, Yavan, Galut Yavan is the part that is connected to Hanukkah. The rest of this is sort of a description of what's going on in all of history. Okay. So, and like I said, he said that it's implicit in that verse from Bereshit, Va'aretz hayta tohu bavel vohu prasu medai v'choshech yavan al pnei hatahom. That's this Edom or the evil empire or whatever. And then the second half of the verse says, V'ruach Elokim merachafet al pnei hamayim. Okay, the Ruach, and Chazal tell us, what's the Ruach Elokim? It's the Ruach of Melech Mashiach. Okay, and Bizchut Tshuva Shenimshala Lamayim, Al Pnei Hamayim. They're saying that Tshuva is Nimshala Lamayim. They also, of course, we know that Torah is Nimshala Lamayim. So it's the Ruach of Melech Mashiach, that's the final thing. We come back to a state of unity. It starts off, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the heavens and everything in them, the earth and everything on it. He creates, everything's in a state of unity. He creates diversity within the unity, okay? And in order to give us free will, we have to have a sense that our choice means something, that there is a choice between one thing and another, which means that there's artificial sense of lack in order that I have to choose, right? I only have so much time. Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Tomorrow, there's something going on by Beta Rav Kook that I wish I could be there to help show how important I think that place is in terms of our morashet. And I can't be there because I'm teaching math. And it's like, I have to make choices. I have to make choices in this world. So that's the way the world is now. But it wasn't the way the world was actually in Gan Eden. That's the way the world is post eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the irbuvia that comes afterwards. And now I have to make these choices. But even before that, even before Gan Eden, the earth started off with tohu and vohu and choshech al pnei tahom, with these four basic lacks. So I've talked about three of them. Okay, the lack of seder and order and wanting to be in charge and to be important. The desire for kavod, the physical lack, because I'm in a body that is deteriorating, and I think if I can only put in more, have more of everything, then somehow I can stab off the end. Okay, and the choshech, which to dispel the darkness, right? Knowledge will dispel that darkness, and so I have this grand desire, this always a lack, because guess what? I can't explain everything with my human logic. That's impossible. It needs to be explained with reference to divinity. And that's the one thing that was anathema to the Greeks. Okay. And then the fourth one, so the first three, whether they fought against us physically, whatever, but the third one, the Greeks wanted to detach us from God. Okay. The fourth one is in many ways the hardest and worst of them all. It's the desire to be everything. It's I don't want there to be anything else in the world, because if there's something else in the world that's not me, okay, then I'm lacking something. The only way I can be complete and whole is if I'm everything. And the problem with that is that leads somebody who has that kind of taiva, that kind of almost a psychosis, whether it's in a person or whether it's in a culture, that leads them to want to destroy anything that's the other. Okay. And so that's why the Maharal calls it the Malchut Harishia, the evil empire. And to be honest, it feels like that's what this cancel culture business that everybody keeps talking about is going on about. It's like wipe anything out that's not me. Now, they claim, they're being very, very inclusive. As long as you're inclusive of the right stuff. And if you're not inclusive of the right stuff, then we're going to change history and we're going to wipe you out and we're going to silence you and we're going to, like, what's going on today is still part of Rome. It's still part of Edom. It's still part of, so they actually really wanted to wipe us out. Okay. They wanted to wipe us out. We're still dealing with that galut. Okay. That's the last galut. And at the end, like this self-propelled Evan. We talked a couple of weeks ago in the Kedushat Levi class about how Evan Rosha, that Yaakov is referred to as an Evan. This self-built rock that's the tashtit, the building, the point from which, right, that Evan Hashtiah, the point from which the world was created, okay, comes and knocks out all these things and then grows into this great mountain. And what is that saying to us? It's saying that first there's a pre-unity. Then there's this diversity that has all these senses of lack in it. And then when we get to a place where we can fill those lacks in a holy way by connecting to God and realizing, oh, there was never really any lack at all. Okay. Then all of the misapprehensions that we had just dissipate and go away. So the Maharal brings, besides showing how it's woven into the fabric of the universe, and so we talked about the Rosh Zahav has to do with the nafshi and with the wanting to rule, that the guf kesef has to do with the kisufim and the bodily desires, ta'ava, that Yavan has to do with the sichli and this brazen idea that they can know everything. And so they're perfectly happy to honor the Torah, right? Yavan later on, not at the time of the Hashmonaim, but actually, was it earlier or later? Were the ones who demanded that we translate the Torah into Greek. And there's positive stuff there, right? We're told that that's the only other language that it can be written in. And at the same time, we fast on the day that the translation was made. because it went to the wrong way. It went to klipa. It could have gone, this desire of humanity, okay, the lack of knowledge and the wanting to fill it is something that can go to a very beautiful, very positive place. The recognizing that I'm in choshech and that I want the or. If I go to the or Eloki, I'm heading in the right direction. If I insist that the or be enoshi, that the or be human and disconnected from God, then I have a real problem. Okay, and basically, so the Maharal went through, and that's what he did with the various different things. The reason for Nechoshet or is that in Yeshiah, he brings a pasuk or part of a pasuk from Yeshiyahu that says mitzchacha. I can pronounce this maybe. Mitzchacha nechusha. Your forehead is brazen. Okay, brass and bronze and brazenness. You hear, even in English, you hear how these words essentially are related to one another. It's the chutzpah of thinking that I can know everything. It's a different kind of wanting to have rulership. Okay. There's the rulership because I want kavod. There's the rulership because I want stuff to stave off the dangers, right? And there's this rulership because I want to know it all. I want to control it so that I know, not control it so that I have kavod, right? And then essentially the worst one, the hardest one of all, is the one that we're in right now, which is this desire to be everything. Okay. He also makes a comparison to the 4 kinds of non-kosher animals that are specified in the Torah and the Pasuk. There's the gamal, the shafan, and the arnevet. The gamal is the first one mentioned. That's Bavel. Shafan is the second one mentioned. That's Paras Madai. Arnevet is the third one mentioned. That's Yavan. And by each of them, it says ki ma'le gerahu, because it chews its cud. Excuse me. It doesn't chew its cud, right? Ki ma'le gerahu. Oh, it does. Excuse me. It does. Right. It does chew its cud, but it doesn't have the cloven hoofs. Malagerahu, it does chew its cud, so it is doing that aspect of taking in and then regurgitating it and working through it again. There's a point in each of those first 3 that could potentially be properly connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where it could properly, get that sense of lack fulfilled. It could be done properly, but it's missing the split hooves, right? And the Maharal then goes on and says, but because it's malagerahu, it eventually tries to remove HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the picture. That's the problem, because it doesn't have the split hooves, as opposed to the 4th kingdom. The 4th Malchut is a reference to Edom, and that's the Chazir, which has the split hoof but does not chew its cud. And the problem there is that it has no connection, right? It doesn't even have the connection. It has on the outside, look how holy I am, look how good I am, I'm da-da-da, but it has nothing on the inside. And there, because the problem is that it wants to be everything. It wants there to be nothing outside of itself. Okay. So the chazir is the most problematic. And so, I mean, I don't think it would occur to any of us to eat rabbits or camels or anything like that. But, but we see lots of places where people do go and eat the pork. So anyway, the Kitzur, basically, this was a review of what the Maharal did with the four parts of the body of that statue. And then there's some others that the Maharal didn't bring up. And there are also some things, and unfortunately, I don't know why Sfaria doesn't have this parish, but they don't. So I'm going to go through it from the, I'm going to have to go through it from the book. I wasn't sure if I was going to have time left over. Does anybody have any questions about the summary that I did of Ner Mitzvah? About the details or about the how the Maharal presented it, or how I presented the Maharal, which is yet a different issue. Okay. So let me see if I can find okay. Okay, so in that case, I was thinking it was in Rasag. It may have been that Rasag did it in. Okay, so he also, so Rav Sadia Gaon, so this is from long before the Maharal. The Maharal was an Achron, okay, and Rav Sadia Gaon was one of the Gaonim from the period right after the Gemara. They were still in Bavel, actually. And he says, so when Daniel is explaining the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, you are this head of gold. Okay, so Rav Sadia Gaon says to us, this is the kingdom of Bavel, and you are the head of gold because you saw in this statue, just as the head is the top part of the entire body and the best part of the body, and gold is the best of all of the metals. So you have this possibility, right, of being above all of the kingdoms that are now and that are to come, that you have the potential to be the best of them. Doesn't mean that he necessarily chose to follow through on that, okay? He has, at this point, he has the choice to say, oh, I'm just a kli in the hand of Kadosh Baruch Hu, okay? Or he can say, God's doing this for me because I'm so great, right? And if he's saying, oh, God's doing this for me because I'm so great, then he's missing the whole point. And this has to do with his need, and in general, Bavel's need for chashivut and etc. And Daniel is, in a sense, he's feeding into that, by saying that. But he explains, like what was this whole business about the dream? And then he forgot the dream. And then Daniel had to, was it just to bring Daniel in so that Daniel could be the one to properly interpret the dream? Nebuchadnezzar didn't have to forget the dream, right? In the Egypt story, Pharaoh remembers what he dreamt. Beholzot, none of his Hartumim, Chashvim, Ashafim, whoever, nobody can explain it to him. And and they eventually have to get Yosef out of prison to come explain it to him. Why didn't the same story repeat itself here, right? It could have been Nebuchadnezzar dreamt this dream. It left him feeling shaken, and he wants an answer to it, and none of his people can answer it in a way that makes sense to him. And so they finally say, what about that Jewish kid? Let's try Daniel. And right, it could have happened that way, exactly the same way as the Yosef story happens. So why doesn't it? Okay. Why doesn't it happen that way? Why does it happen this way, that Nebuchadnezzar then has to forget the dream? And then what Daniel is able to do is so much greater in a way, except that what it's doing is it's saying, Nebuchadnezzar, on the one hand, you're the king. These are the kinds of things, like Daniel says to him. When we translated the verses last week, we talked about it, but Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, this is because you're the king, and these are the kinds of things that you're thinking about. Okay. When you go to bed at night, you're not thinking about, what am I going to have for breakfast tomorrow? Or whatever. You're thinking about what is going to be the future of my country, what's going to be the future for my people. And so, because that's what you're thinking about, so God answered you, but then he took the answer away from you to say, but God's really in charge. Okay, so do you recognize that that's what's going on? Can you absorb that and function that way or not? Anyway, so I was trying to bring you what Rav Sadia Gaon had to say about it. And so he explained about the okay, so you're the king, and then the pasuk actually says you're the king, and then it says Melech Malchaya. So is he saying, it's really interesting, is he saying you are the king of kings, Di Elishmaya, that the God of heaven gave you this kingdom, right? And so that's why he's giving you this dream, and all the rest of this is happening. Or Rav Sadia Gaon says the Melech Malchaya changed, essentially he's changing the Tamei Mikra, and he says you're the king, but Melech Malchaya, who is the God in heaven, is the one who puts kings in their place and giving you all this kavod and all this power. But so the Melech, because somebody actually asked me the question last week, how can Daniel say that you are Malka Melech Malchaya, that you're the king of kings? That, to a human, how can Daniel say that? And so Rav Sadia Gaon had the same question. This is actually for Miriam, who's not online with us, but who generally listens to the stream afterwards. And so you should know that that's how it goes. And then, and so then he's explaining what it is. So you're this head of gold, okay, which is Bavel, and And after you, there's going to be something which is less than you. Okay, that's how we translated it anyway. Era minach is less than you. Just as silver is less than gold. And that's the kingdom of Madai, which was, in a sense, less or worse. But Arayot to whom, okay, he brings some other things, and its power is less. Or Devar Acher Eraminach is worse than you. Devar Acher Eraminach Shafel Mimach. All of these are that it's okay. He's dealing with this question of, because era is not a usual word. He was trying to deal with that. And the third kingdom, he says, is like Nechoshet. That's Malchut Yavan. So when the Maharal gave us those four, he's not making this up new for himself. You hear that Reb Saadia Gaon's also bringing it. There are also some Gemaras that bring parts of it. There isn't a single Gemara that brings the whole thing. But he says the third one is Malchut Yavan, because they were hard like Nechoshet, and they ruled over all of Eretz Yisrael. And the fourth one is strong like Barzel. And he says that's actually, it's interesting. He says that's Aram. Okay. So that's kind of confusing. That would be like saying it's Turkey. Which, if you are Reb Saadia Gaon living in Bavel during the rise of Islam, and also the Greek Orthodox Church, right? There's been a split, and Constantinople, right after Emperor Constantine. So it had been Edom, but he doesn't say that it's Edom, which everybody else says. He says it's Aram. And that was really the part that I wanted to get to share with you, that there are other ideas. Okay. And he says that it's Aram. And here that was about all that he said. And then, wait a second. And then he goes on, but then he says there's a different way of doing this. Okay. That because it says that the whole thing is going to be the part that was cheres. And he brings examples from elsewhere to prove the meaning of Aramaic. And so all of a sudden he says, that's Madayu Pras. Wait a second. But he told us that the Kesef was Madayu Pras, and now he's coming back, he's changing. He says, that's Madayu Pras because they divided the kingdom. In other words, those toes that were partly steel and partly cheres, he says that's Madayim Paras because they divided the kingdom between them. It was half of one and half of the other. But if that's the case, then how do you go back and the arms that were and the chest? So they said, okay, part of it was Madai and part of it was Paras. That one of them had the Chachma and the other one had the warriors. And then the third one, which was like Nechoshet, he comes back and he says, these are Bnei Yavan and Anshe Mocha, specifically Macedonia. In other words, he's referring it to be Alexander the Great. They were Kashim Kenachoshet, and they ruled over all the world. And the fourth one is Chazakah Barzel, as it's written in the Aramaic. Thank you. And there he says, there are those, Katsat Meapotrim, there are all sorts of people who, even though we have Sefer Daniel, we have the language of Sefer Daniel, but nonetheless, what the heck does he mean? I mean, Daniel described the dream. Nebuchadnezzar's like, yep, okay, now it's all coming back to me. And Daniel provides an answer as to what the dream meant that was satisfying to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar didn't really need to know about everything that was happening after him. He needed to know that he was the best, he was the greatest, but wasn't going. The entire thing isn't made of gold. The entire thing isn't important. And to be honest, that was probably better for him. If he was going to have to die, it was probably better for him, as given his psychology, that he should be the best and the top and the brightest, and everything that comes after him should just continue to get worse and let it all disappear. That's fine. Once he's gone, like the world is gone anyway, what's important? That's about him. And so for him, but here's the place. So Rav Saadia Gaon now says there are those of the Potrim, who, in other words, who are trying to understand what Daniel meant in terms of our history, because we are past some of the times that Daniel is speaking about. When he was speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel was speaking only about what's in present and in his future. He wasn't talking about anything that had happened until then. But for us, we've lived through a whole bunch more history. So for us, what's going on? So Reb Saadia Gaon says to us, so those who are trying to understand it, and they say that the Malchut Aram, okay, there are those who say this thing about Barzel is Malchut Aram, which is what he said to begin with, right? And in my opinion, that's not true. Rather, it should have said Edom. So he's coming back and he's changing from what he said the first time, and he's changing it. He's saying, right, it really should be Rome. It should be Asa, Edom. Okay. V'aye efo malchut Yishmael. But if that's the case, then what happened to the kingdom of Ishmael? Which he already saw. Like in those days, Islam was getting ready to take over the entire Near East and Middle East. It wasn't yet poised to take over Southern Europe, which it eventually does. Actually, it doesn't take over Italy, but it sweeps across North Africa and goes up and takes over Spain and Portugal, and is also was threatening Europe also on the east. So but that actually hasn't happened yet when Rav Saadia Gaon is writing. And he says, but so where's, and certainly not this resurgence of worldwide Islamic jihad that we're having to function with now. So where is that? And he says, below Kenhu, that's not the case. Ki lo amar hakatuv malchut achrei pliga, ela amar zot malchut pliga tahave nechleket tiye l'shnaim pritzim. So now he's saying that, okay, those legs of steel, that was Edom. And then the bottom where it's steel and cheres, or iron and cheres, that's between the West and Islam. Okay. And they're divided into these two different things. That's Aram v'Yishmael. Aram chazaka kabarzel v'Yishmael kacheres. So he says, so that's predicting what's going on today, perhaps. But again, he's coming back to the issue of Aram, not Edom for that part. Or is it Edom and Yishmael, which is not something that he could have foreseen, that there could be any kind of power sharing in the world between that. And the second way, he says, ki lo amar chamisha malchiot. It didn't say 5 kingdoms. It said, Daniel didn't say 5. He said there were 4. Okay. V'lo amar revi'it v'chamishit. When he spoke about the toes, the pasuk is ve'etz ba'at raglaya minhon farzelu minhon chasa. But he doesn't say that this is a different kind of kingdom or a different kingdom. It said, this is the pasuk. V'di chazaita raglaya ve'etzba'ata minhon chasaf dipecher or minhon parza. You saw the feet and the toes. Some were pottery and some were iron. Malchu pliga. It's a divided nation. It's a divided empire. Tehave. Okay. It started just strong like Barzel, and now it becomes a divided empire. So there are people who want to say, oh, that's because the Roman Empire split. All right. For Rav Saadia Gaon, and so we're looking at it with hindsight. And we say, oh, it's because, the Roman Empire split, and so there are all the different countries of Europe, or the Roman Empire split, and there's the and this is maybe closer to what Rav Saadia Gaon's talking about. And there's the West that remained Catholic, Christian, whatever, the West. And there was the East there, which eventually, Turkey and Russia and whatever. But it doesn't call this a 5th empire, it speaks about it just as a split one. That there's a power sharing of some sort going on. And so that was why he tried to take it back and say like Paras and Madai, where there was the power sharing between Paras and Madai. But now he comes back and he says, and now he's talking about it being Yishmael and Aram, or Yishmael and Edom, perhaps. And the fact that it said Parzela Ma'arav v'chasaf tina, but can iron actually mix together with pottery? The two things don't, you can solder 2 kinds of metal together. You can make things go together, but what can you do to try to make, to make metal and pottery stick together? And so then he says, Lahavon davkin, in order that they should be stuck together, denying one with the other. Mitarvin v'lo nidbakin, because they can be mixed, but they can't actually stick together. All right, so there's something essentially different about, according to, this is where Yishmael comes into the picture. And now I am way out of time. So I apologize for holding anybody longer than they wanted to be. So it's related to Hanukkah in that the Nechoshet, the leopard, that 3rd empire, everybody pretty much agrees that was Yavon. Had this great desire for knowledge, and they wanted to deny us our connection to Elokut, to divinity. They wanted, and which is why they forbade us Rosh Chodesh, which is why they forbade us Brit Milah, because and Shabbat, they would have been very happy if we would have just been intellectual. Okay. And just been very knowledgeable and very wise. And it's even okay to be very ethical. But the problem that they had with us, and the reason that there were the Gzerot Shmad, was because the Greek philosophy at the time really needed man to be in charge. And so that, and whether you see Hanukkah as a fight against an outside overlord, or whether you see Hanukkah as a civil war between those of us who get trapped in that type of galut, that type of lack, and trying to fill it in an inappropriate way versus in the appropriate way, that was what Hanukkah was about. And I wish you all a wonderful Hanukkah. Does anybody have any questions now? Okay.